Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really raw, pretty intense Sky News panel discussion that just happened. It's this fascinating look at how traditional Australian life is, well, frankly, colliding head-on with modern shifts. The commentators were tackling everything from grocery shock to highway headaches, really mapping out this deep, almost palpable unease about just how fast society is changing right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got 4 big topics on the agenda today. 1. Cost of living price shocks. 2. The electric vehicle transition. 3. Vice taxes and black markets. And finally, 4. Cannabis and road safety.
Let's kick things off with part 1, cost of living price shocks and the end of cheap staples.
Now, when we talk about the cost of living crisis, you usually hear all these abstract economic terms, right? Inflation rates, consumer price indices, but the panel, they didn't use any of that jargon. They anchored their absolute frustration around one incredibly specific everyday item: fish. $145.50. No joke. The commentators threw this number out there with total shock. And no, this isn't for premium caviar. This was cited as the actual current per kilo price of King George whiting, which is a traditional South Australian favorite. They used this massive number to highlight the sheer disbelief that everyday staples now carry luxury price tags. They were basically wondering if the fish is suddenly being made out of gold.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the inflation shock across the board, because it wasn't just the whiting. The panel pointed out flathead is hitting over $75 a kilo at a Melbourne market. Even flake, gummy shock, which has historically been the cheap, absolute standard go-to for a basic family fish and chip night, that's now sitting at $45 to $50 a kilo. The panel's observation here is pretty stark. What used to be a budget-friendly, basic family dinner is now viewed as extraordinarily elite and, well, utterly unaffordable for the average household. The contrast here is literally so extreme that it sparked some pretty dark humor among the commentators. They pointed out that flathead used to physically be chopped up and used as cheap bait, and today, they joked it's practically a highly priced financial asset. One commentator even quipped about buying a few kilos just to chuck under the mattress to store away as intergenerational wealth. It's a funny image for sure, but it really masks a deep anxiety about everyday life just slipping out of financial reach.
Moving right along to Section 2, the electric vehicle transition, or nostalgia versus technology. So just as the panel felt priced out of traditional meals, they expressed a really intense skepticism toward the technological shifts happening right in our own driveways. The jumping-off point for this debate was the news that Tesla is officially the best-selling car in Australia. Now, while the panel acknowledged this huge milestone, let me tell you, they were definitely not celebrating it. In fact, they heavily contrasted this new reality with their own deep nostalgia for the older combustion engine models from their youth, the Commodores and the Falcons that used to just rule the roads. The absolute crux of their debate really boils down to cost and longevity. The panel actively hopes to keep the cheap, long-lasting used car market a secret. They were praising the old reliables from the late 90s and early 2000s. Vehicles you can easily pick up for around $15,000 to $20,000 that will just happily run for 500,000 kilometers. They contrasted that rugged old-school longevity with the $80,000 to $150,000 price tag of modern electric vehicles. To them, the modern tech is just an expensive, totally unnecessary leap. And their skepticism goes way deeper than just the upfront cost. Listen to this quote from the discussion. These things have an end life like your Apple phone. Tesla will start doing the same thing with the battery cars. They are expressing a profound, real fear of planned obsolescence here. They're essentially likening heavy, incredibly expensive motor vehicles to disposable consumer electronics that just, get turned off or go dark the second the manufacturer decides it's time for you to upgrade. We can really summarize the panel's core anxieties regarding EVs into 3 main points. First off, they questioned what the disposal plans actually are from millions of dead, giant batteries, noting that stakeholders just aren't answering this. Second, they raised fears about intense battery fires, specifically citing incidents of golf buggies burning down buildings. And finally, they voiced a real geopolitical anxiety, a fear that foreign manufacturers, particularly Chinese automakers, might harbor some malevolent impulse to just remotely shut down these high-tech vehicles. Okay, let's look at part 3, vice taxes and black markets, and their unintended consequences. Building on this whole theme of government regulation clashing with everyday Australian life, the panel turned their attention to what they view as the disastrous, completely unintended consequences of vice taxes. They laid out a very clear chain of events to explain the current crime wave that's making headlines everywhere. Step 1. The government drastically raises taxes on things like alcohol and tobacco to discourage use. Step 2. The legal products become entirely unaffordable for regular consumers. Step 3, instead of just quitting, consumers actively seek out cheap, fake, bootlegged alternatives. And step 4, a violent black market naturally emerges to meet that demand. The panel argues that these well-intentioned taxes are, quite literally, directly fueling organized crime. To really underline the economic damage of these taxes, they pointed to the recent closure of the historic Bogues Brewery in Launceston, Tasmania. The panel actually mourned this shutdown as a deeply un-Australian tragedy, arguing that these intense economic and regulatory pressures are simply killing off heritage businesses. But the cost isn't just lost businesses, is it? It's physical destruction. The panel cited this absolutely staggering figure, $3 million. That was the value of alcohol destroyed in a recent Melbourne warehouse firebombing. They used this number to really highlight the raw intensity and the real-world, violent cost of this black market turf war that is playing out right now on city streets. This quote right here perfectly captures the commentator's overall frustration. It's like living in the 1920s instead of the 2020s. They feel that modern regulations have, ironically, dragged society backward. Instead of getting progressive health outcomes, they argue, these taxes have just recreated a gangster-era chaos filled with prohibition-style alcohol and tobacco wars.
And that brings us to Section 4, Cannabis and Road Safety, the Impairment Dilemma.
Moving straight from illegal black markets, the panel debated a newly legalized gray area, the completely confusing intersection of medicinal cannabis laws and public road safety. The whole debate was sparked by this specific, New South Wales rule. Motorists using medicinal cannabis will no longer be automatically penalized when pulled over for a roadside drug test. The panel noted this massive shift, and they foresee that other states, like Victoria, are probably going to adopt similar measures soon. But man, it immediately raised some serious practical safety questions for them. Now, to be fair here, the panel did concede that there is a legitimate medical need for these substances. They anchored this concession using a specific anecdote about rugby league legend Andrew Johns, who apparently relies on medicinal cannabis gummies every single night to sleep because of severe back pain. Even though one panelist complained that the smell of marijuana on the streets of places like New York is totally repellent, they all ultimately acknowledged the medical reality of the situation. But, acknowledging the medicine doesn't exactly solve the road safety issue. The core debate comes down to this really tricky comparison, testing for presence versus testing for impairment. Right now, tests can easily detect if cannabis is present in your system from days ago, but that absolutely doesn't prove you are intoxicated right now behind the wheel. However, actually testing for impairment on the side of the road, that is incredibly hard to measure. The panel shared some pretty funny anecdotes about American impairment tests, like making drivers walk straight lines, touch their noses, or even say the alphabet backwards, just to highlight exactly how tricky this is to get right. And this leaves us with the panel's big unresolved dilemma. How do we accurately test for impairment? If a driver takes a medicinal gummy for back pain on a Tuesday night, how slow or impaired are they the next day? One panelist actually jokingly suggested using a Mars bar test, basically holding out a chocolate bar, and if the driver takes a bite because they have the munchies, boom, they're too impaired to drive. It's a funny joke for sure, but it really points to a serious, glaring gap in our current roadside safety protocols. So, what does this all mean? From the price of a fish dinner and the batteries in our cars, to the taxes on our vices and the laws on our roads, this panel discussion mapped out a deeply felt cultural anxiety. It all boils down to this single, unifying question. How does society balance rapid progress and new regulations with everyday practicalities, affordability, and, of course, safety? It's a question that clearly has a lot of people feeling totally left behind, and one we are all going to have to figure out as we move forward. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this helped unpack the debate for you.